What would you do if you were wrongly accused in front of a crowd simply because of the way you look? Malik, a well-dressed black teenager, faces this harsh reality when a biased security guard falsely accuses him of shoplifting at an upscale mall. As tensions escalate and the truth comes to light, it leaves us asking, how often do our assumptions lead us to act unfairly? And more importantly, what happens when those in power are forced to confront their own prejudices? Before we dive into this emotional story, let us know in the comments where you're watching or listening from today, and feel free to subscribe for more content like this. The shopping mall in Richmond, Virginia hummed with life, its wide corridors echoing the rhythm of footsteps from shoppers lost in their own worlds. The gleam of store windows reflected designer bags and high-end fashion, casting fleeting images of people as they passed by. Ethan, the mall's night security guard, surveyed the scene with a well-practiced eye. He'd been doing this for 2 years, but something about tonight felt different, though he couldn't quite place what it was. His radio crackled to life, and a familiar voice came through. Sarah, his partner for the shift. "All good on your end?" Ethan adjusted the radio on his hip and responded, "So far so good. Just the usual weekend crowd." He scanned the floor and caught sight of a group of teenagers huddled near the entrance of Bonamy, one of the more upscale stores. There were 4 of them, laughing and talking loudly, a common sight on a Friday evening. Among them was Malik, dressed sharply in a tailored navy blue jacket, well-fitted jeans, and a sleek pair of sneakers. He wasn't like the others, who seemed more casual in their worn-out hoodies and sneakers. Ethan's eyes locked on Malik, and a spark of suspicion flared in his chest. There was no real reason, just an instinct, he thought. The group of teens didn't seem to be shopping. They were loitering, doing nothing, maybe waiting for trouble to find them. His radio crackled again, snapping him out of his thoughts. "You see something?" Sarah's voice was calm, but the undertone suggested she knew where his mind had gone. She had worked with Ethan long enough to sense when he was on alert. "Maybe," Ethan said, already moving toward the group. "Just checking something out." As Ethan approached, Malik glanced over but returned his attention to his phone, oblivious to the scrutiny. Ethan's footsteps slowed when he got closer, taking a moment to size up the situation. He cleared his throat, his voice stern as he addressed the group. "Hey," Ethan said, gesturing with his hand. "What are you all doing here?" One of the boys, wearing a backwards cap, shot him a disinterested look. "Just hanging out, man. We're not doing anything wrong." Ethan's gaze flicked back to Malik, the sharpest dressed of the group. He felt his heart rate pick up. "You," Ethan pointed. "What are you doing? Been watching you stand here for a while." Malik raised his eyes, calm but confused. "Waiting for my friends," he said, his voice steady. "Why?" Ethan's face hardened. "Why? Because you don't look like you're waiting for anything. I want to know if you've been inside the store." His hand motioned toward the glass doors of Bonamy, but his tone held an accusatory edge. Malik blinked, disbelief spreading across his features. "What? No, I haven't. I've just been standing here." The laughter and chatter of Malik's friends died down. They shifted uneasily, their attention now solely on Ethan. Sarah, watching from a distance, felt her stomach turn. She had seen Ethan do this before, single out someone without real cause. But this time, it was different. She could see the fear in Malik's face, the shift in the energy around them. "You think I'm shoplifting?" Malik asked, his voice no longer steady, edged with incredulity. He glanced toward the store as if trying to piece together why he was being singled out. Ethan took a step closer. "You tell me. Why don't you empty your pockets?" The demand hung in the air like thick smoke, choking the casual atmosphere that had existed just moments before. The other teens went quiet, eyes darting between Ethan and Malik. Malik stood taller, his posture firm. "No, I didn't steal anything. I'm not emptying my pockets. I haven't done anything wrong." Ethan's eyes narrowed, his frustration growing. "Empty your pockets," he repeated, his voice louder, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers. "What's going on here?" a woman asked from a distance, curiosity quickly spreading through the crowd that had begun to gather. Sarah could see things spiraling. This was going too far. She clenched her fists, her pulse quickening. Ethan was on a power trip, and she knew it. Malik took a deep breath. "Listen, man, I'm just here to meet up with my friends. I don't want any trouble." He reached for his phone, his voice tight. "If you keep this up, we're going to have a problem." A smirk flickered across Ethan's lips. "Oh, we already have one." Suddenly, Ethan lunged forward and grabbed Malik's arm. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. "I told you to empty your pockets, now!" Malik pulled back, trying to keep his composure. "Let go of me." His voice was no longer calm. It was sharp, full of a frustration that had clearly been building for a long time. "You have no right!" Ethan tightened his grip, and the situation turned chaotic. People in the crowd began to record the scene with their phones, whispering and murmuring as they watched. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. This was wrong. This was all wrong. She couldn't stay silent any longer. She took a step forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Ethan, that's enough." Ethan shot a glance at her, surprised by her interruption. "What? You think he's innocent?" Sarah swallowed hard, her face pale but resolute. "I do. You're going too far." Ethan released Malik, but his face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Malik straightened his jacket, his voice calm but cold. "You just made a big mistake." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Malik cut him off, speaking louder now so the crowd could hear him. "You want to know who I am? My name is Malik Dawson." He paused for a beat, letting his words sink in. "My father owns this mall, and when he hears about what just happened, you'll be out of a job." The weight of Malik's words hit Ethan like a freight train. His eyes widened in shock, and his hands dropped to his sides. "What did you say?" Ethan asked, his voice suddenly small, stripped of its authority. "You heard me," Malik said. "Now call your manager. I want to talk to them, right now." Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm. "I'll call them. Malik, I'm sorry for what happened. I'll make sure this is handled." Ethan stood frozen, his confidence shattered. The onlookers murmured amongst themselves, some shaking their heads in disapproval. Malik stared at Ethan for a long moment before turning away, walking toward Sarah. "Let's get this sorted out," Malik said quietly, but the anger was still there beneath the surface. As Sarah led Malik away, Ethan stood alone, the consequences of his actions sinking in. He had acted on his biases, and now he would have to face the fallout. Over the next few days, the mall's management launched a full investigation into Ethan's conduct. The incident had gone viral online, with video after video showing Ethan's aggression and Malik's calm resistance. People were outraged, demanding answers from the mall's leadership. Ethan was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, but the damage was already done. The footage had exposed a deeper issue, one that couldn't be ignored any longer. As for Sarah, she became a key witness in the investigation, speaking out against Ethan's actions. It wasn't easy for her. She had worked with Ethan for years, but what he did was wrong, and she couldn't stay silent. In the end, justice was served. Ethan lost his job, and the mall implemented new training programs for their security staff, focused on eliminating racial profiling and ensuring everyone was treated with respect. Malik didn't just want to see Ethan punished. He wanted to make sure something good came out of the situation. And thanks to his persistence, change was finally happening. The mall was quieter now, months after the incident. The crowds had thinned, and the echoes of the past lingered in the air. But for Malik, Sarah, and everyone who had been there that day, one thing was clear. Justice had been done, and it would serve as a reminder to everyone that actions born of prejudice have consequences, and the truth always comes to light in the end. Ethan sat at home that evening, staring blankly at the TV as the news broadcast played in the background. He had been glued to it for hours, hoping they wouldn't mention the incident at the mall again. But they did. Repeatedly. The latest on the Richmond Mall incident, where a security guard was caught on video racially profiling a black teenager. Ethan rubbed his face in frustration. His phone buzzed, but he ignored it. He already knew who was calling. His supervisor had phoned him 3 times, leaving voicemails that only confirmed what he already knew. His suspension was becoming permanent. The mall's leadership couldn't afford the PR nightmare his actions had caused. The footage had spread far beyond Richmond. News channels, online forums, and social media platforms were filled with comments condemning his behavior. People he'd never met were dissecting his life, painting him as a villain. He switched the TV off and sat in silence for a moment, the sound of his breathing filling the room. What had he been thinking? At the time, it had all seemed so instinctual. He was just doing his job, wasn't he? But now, as he replayed the scene in his mind, he could see it clearly. Malik hadn't done anything wrong, yet Ethan had treated him like a criminal from the moment he laid eyes on him. He knew what was coming next. The investigation was wrapping up, and it wouldn't be long before his official termination. And beyond that, there was Malik. He hadn't just been any teenager. He had connections, power. And Ethan? He was nothing. He would probably never work in security again. Ethan sighed deeply and ran his hand through his hair. His mind kept coming back to Sarah. She'd been there the whole time. She'd watched it happen. And in the end, she had turned on him. Maybe she had been right. Maybe she saw things more clearly than he had. But still, it felt like a betrayal. Meanwhile, Malik sat in his father's office at home. The walls were lined with awards, plaques, and framed articles detailing his father's rise to success. Malik had grown up surrounded by the trappings of wealth and privilege, but none of it had shielded him from the moment at the mall. Not his clothes, not his family's money, not even his father's status. He stared at his phone, scrolling through the dozens of texts and DMs that had flooded in since the video went viral. Everyone was talking about it. His friends, classmates, even people he hadn't spoken to in years. Some of the messages were supportive, but others were laced with anger and confusion. Why hadn't he fought back? Why hadn't he done more in the moment? Malik turned off his phone, tossing it aside. It wasn't that simple. He had tried to stay calm, to keep things from getting worse. But as much as he tried to move past it, the humiliation still stung. He could still feel Ethan's hand gripping his arm, the way the crowd had stared at him, judging him before they even knew the full story. His father entered the room, his presence commanding as always. "Malik, we need to talk." Malik straightened up in his chair. He knew his father had been in meetings all day with the mall's management team, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. His father was a man who valued reputation above all else, and this incident had thrown their family into the spotlight in a way that no one wanted. "I just got off the phone with the board," his father said, sitting across from him. "They're taking this very seriously. The guard, Ethan, he'll be fired, and they're going to review all of their security practices moving forward." Malik nodded, though he wasn't sure how he felt about it. "Good. But it's not just about firing him, Dad. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again. To anyone." His father's expression softened slightly. "I know, and we're working on that. But Malik, you have to understand something. In situations like this, it's easy for people to get caught up in the moment. They make mistakes. Sometimes big ones. That's what happened here." Malik frowned, his voice firm. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. His father held his gaze for a moment before nodding slowly. "You're right. It was a choice. And that's why we're not letting this slide." There was a pause, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Malik could see his father was trying to keep things professional, to handle this like any other business crisis. But for Malik, this wasn't just business. It was personal. I want to be involved in the changes, Malik said suddenly, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. His father raised an eyebrow. Involved? How? I don't know yet, Malik admitted. But I want to make sure the policies they put in place actually do something. That they actually stop this from happening again. To anyone. Not just me. His father considered him for a moment, then nodded. All right, we can make that happen. Sarah was sitting in the security office the next day, staring at her own reflection in the blank computer screen. The investigation was over, but she hadn't been able to shake the feeling that she should have done more. She had hesitated, letting Ethan take control of the situation for too long before stepping in. Now, with the fallout all around them, she couldn't help but wonder if she could have prevented everything. When she had first taken the job as a security guard, it hadn't been about power or control. She had genuinely wanted to help people, to protect them. But over time, she had seen how easy it was to fall into the routine, to let biases slip in without even realizing it. She sighed and glanced at the empty desk where Ethan used to sit. He hadn't been back to the mall since the incident, and from what she had heard, he wouldn't be returning. She couldn't say she was sorry about that. What Ethan had done was wrong, plain and simple, but it still weighed on her. How easily it had all spiraled out of control. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Malik standing there, his hands tucked into his pockets. He looked calm, but there was a weight in his expression that hadn't been there before. Hey, he said, stepping inside. You got a minute? Sarah nodded. Of course, come on in. Malik took a seat across from her, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. It was the first time they had spoken since the incident. Sarah had been expecting some kind of fallout, but Malik didn't seem angry. Just tired. I just wanted to say thanks, Malik finally said, for speaking up. I know it couldn't have been easy. Sarah shook her head. No, it wasn't. But it was the right thing to do. And I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner. Malik nodded, his eyes downcast for a moment. It's crazy how things can get out of hand so fast. I never thought something like that would happen to me, you know? But now it's like, I don't know. I'm looking at things differently. Sarah understood. She had been looking at things differently too. The whole situation had opened her eyes to the subtle ways that bias could creep into her work, even when she wasn't aware of it. I think a lot of people are, she said softly. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it means something will actually change. Malik smiled faintly. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. The days following the incident turned into weeks, and Malik's life hadn't quite returned to normal. Though he kept a low profile, the video of his encounter with Ethan continued to circulate. There were interviews, calls from advocacy groups, and even a few requests from local news outlets. His father had done his best to shield him from the media storm, but it wasn't easy. At school, people treated him differently. Some saw him as a hero, standing up to injustice, while others gave him looks of pity, as if he had somehow been permanently scarred by the experience. Malik wasn't sure how to feel about it. On one hand, he was glad the incident had sparked a broader conversation about racial profiling. But on the other, he just wanted to move on and get back to his life. Yet, deep down, he knew that things had changed for good. One afternoon, Malik sat at a cafe with his best friend, Ryan. The place was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around sipping their coffees. Ryan had been Malik's closest friend for years, and he had been supportive throughout everything. Ryan stirred his drink slowly before speaking. Man, it's wild how everything blew up. I mean, one minute we're just hanging out at the mall, and the next... His voice trailed off as he looked at Malik. Yeah, Malik said, staring out the window. It's still hard to wrap my head around. I didn't think something like that would happen to me, you know? Ryan nodded. No one ever does. But you handled it like a champ. I don't know how you stayed so calm. Malik shrugged. I don't know either. I just knew that if I lost it, things would have gotten worse. especially with Ethan. He wasn't looking to listen. Ryan's expression darkened. He was just looking for a reason to start something. We all saw it. Malik sighed. Yeah, but at least something good is coming out of it. My dad's been talking with the mall management about real changes. New training, new policies, stuff that might actually make a difference. That's awesome, Ryan said, sitting up a little straighter. Maybe it'll stop things like that from happening to other people. Maybe. Malik's voice was thoughtful, but there was a hint of doubt there. He wanted to believe that change was possible, but he also knew that deeply ingrained biases didn't just disappear overnight. Ryan leaned forward. You ever think about what you're gonna do next? Like, with everything that's happened? Malik glanced at him, a small smile tugging at his lips. Funny you mention that. I've been thinking about getting more involved, not just with the mall, but with other stuff. Community programs, maybe talking to schools about what happened. Ryan raised his eyebrows, impressed. That's huge, man. You'd be great at that. Malik chuckled. I don't know about that, but I feel like I need to do something. It's like, after everything that happened, I can't just sit back and pretend it didn't. People need to hear these stories. They need to understand. Ryan nodded, and for a while they just sat in silence, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Malik wasn't sure where his path would lead, but he knew one thing. He couldn't go back to the way things were before. At the mall, changes were already underway. Ethan had officially been terminated, and the mall had rolled out new diversity and bias training for all employees. It wasn't just for show either. The management had brought in outside experts to help reshape the way security and staff approached their jobs. The incident with Malik had been a wake-up call, and they couldn't afford to ignore it. Sarah had attended the first of the training sessions, sitting quietly in the back as the instructor spoke about the dangers of unconscious bias. It was uncomfortable at times, listening to examples that hit a little too close to home, but Sarah knew it was necessary. She couldn't pretend she hadn't been part of the problem, even if she hadn't been as aggressive as Ethan. She had hesitated, and that hesitation had almost cost someone their dignity. After the session, she lingered in the hallway, her mind swirling with thoughts. She had spent years working in security, but for the first time, she was beginning to question the way she had approached her job. What other assumptions had she made over the years? How many times had she let biases guide her actions without even realizing it? As she leaned against the wall, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Malik. Malik. Hey, Sarah. I'm heading to the mall tomorrow. Thought we could talk if you're free. Sarah hesitated for a moment before replying. Sarah. Yeah, I'll be there. Let's talk. The next day, Malik arrived at the mall, his steps measured as he walked through the familiar halls. It felt strange to be back, but he knew he had to face it. The mall had been a part of his life for as long as he could remember. His family had invested in it, helped it grow into the bustling hub it was today. But now, it felt different. The carefree trips he used to take here had been replaced by a heavier sense of awareness. He met Sarah near the security office, where they had first crossed paths. She was waiting for him, looking a little nervous but determined. Malik could see that the incident had affected her, too, in ways she probably hadn't expected. Hey, Sarah said, offering him a small smile. Thanks for meeting me. Malik nodded. No problem. They stood there for a moment, the weight of their shared experience hanging in the air. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice soft but steady. I wanted to apologize again for what happened. I should have stepped in sooner. I saw what was going on, but I froze. I let Ethan take it too far. Malik listened, his expression thoughtful. He appreciated her honesty. It wasn't easy to admit when you'd made a mistake, especially one as significant as this. I get it, Malik said finally. It's not easy to speak up, especially when it's someone you work with. But I'm glad you did, in the end. Sarah nodded, relief washing over her. Thanks. And I'm glad you're okay. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and it's made me realize how much more I need to learn. This whole situation, it's opened my eyes." Malik smiled faintly. "It's opened a lot of people's eyes, I think." They talked for a while longer, exchanging thoughts about the changes happening at the mall and the broader conversation about racial profiling and discrimination. Malik shared his plans to get more involved in the community, and Sarah offered her support, promising to stay in touch and help however she could. As they parted ways, Malik felt a sense of closure, though he knew the journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done, at the mall, in the community, and within himself. But for the first time since the incident, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of all this. Months later, the Richmond Mall was a different place. New policies had been implemented, and the security team had undergone comprehensive training. The mall management made it a priority to create a safer, more inclusive environment for all shoppers, ensuring that incidents like the one with Malik would never happen again. Malik had become an advocate for change, speaking at schools and community centers about his experience and the importance of standing up against prejudice. His story had inspired others to share their own experiences, sparking conversations that had long been overdue. Sarah continued working at the mall, but her perspective had shifted. She was more aware now, more thoughtful in her interactions with others. She had learned that being a good security guard wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about protecting people, all people, with fairness and respect. As for Ethan, he had disappeared from public view. The last Malik had heard, Ethan had moved out of Richmond, unable to find work after the incident. Malik didn't take pleasure in Ethan's downfall, but he knew that actions had consequences. And while Ethan's career had come to an abrupt end, Malik's journey was just beginning. In the end, justice had been served. Not just for Malik, but for everyone who had ever been unfairly judged because of the color of their skin. And though the road ahead was long, Malik was ready to walk it, knowing that change was possible, and that the ties that bind us are stronger than the forces that seek to divide.